Raymond Whitfield was the kind of man who measured everything in dollars. His watch cost more than most people's cars. His shoes were handmade in Italy. And his penthouse in downtown Manhattan had a view that reminded him every single day just how far above everyone else he really was. He had started with nothing. That was the story he loved to tell at every dinner party, every business meeting, every chance he got. Born in a small town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, Raymond had clawed his way up from the bottom. By the time he turned 53, he had built a real estate empire worth over $500 million. But somewhere along the way, the hunger that made him successful turned into something else. It turned into cruelty. Raymond didn't just want to be rich anymore. He wanted everyone around him to feel small. He wanted them to look at him and know they would never be where he was. That feeling, that power over others, had become like a drug to him. On this particular evening, Raymond was hosting the engagement party for his daughter, Vivian. She was 26 years old, smart, and nothing like her father. Where Raymond was loud and boastful, Vivian was quiet and kind. She had begged him to keep the party small and simple, but Raymond never did anything small or simple in his life. So instead, he had invited over 200 guests to his penthouse. Business partners, celebrities, politicians, and old money families filled the rooms. Champagne flowed like water. A jazz band played softly in the corner. Everything was designed to show off Raymond's wealth and status. But Raymond was bored. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, swirling whiskey in his glass, watching his guests mingle and laugh. None of it excited him anymore. He had thrown dozens of parties just like this one. The same fake smiles. The same empty conversations. The same people telling him how amazing he was, while secretly hoping to get something from him. That's when he noticed the young man near the piano. The man looked completely out of place. He was tall and thin, maybe late 20s, with messy dark hair that hadn't seen a proper barber in months. His suit was clearly old and didn't fit quite right. The sleeves were a little too short, and the fabric had that worn look that comes from being washed too many times. Raymond's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize this person, which meant he wasn't a guest. So what was he doing here, standing near the grand piano like he belonged? Raymond walked over, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. A few guests noticed and followed, curious about what had caught his attention. The young man was running his fingers lightly over the piano's surface. Not playing, just touching it gently, almost with reverence. He seemed lost in thought, completely unaware that the owner of the penthouse was now standing right behind him. "Can I help you?" Raymond's voice was cold. The young man jumped slightly and turned around. His eyes widened when he saw Raymond and the small crowd that had gathered. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just finishing up. I'm the piano tuner. The company sent me to check the instrument before the party." His voice was soft and polite. He immediately started gathering his small bag of tools, clearly embarrassed to have been caught lingering. Raymond should have let him go. Any reasonable person would have simply nodded and moved on. But Raymond wasn't interested in being reasonable. He had been bored all evening, and now he sensed an opportunity for some entertainment. "Piano tuner," Raymond repeated slowly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. He let out a short laugh. "So you tune pianos for a living. How much does that pay? 30,000 a year? 40 if you're lucky?" The young man's face flushed red. "I do all right, sir. Do you now?" Raymond gestured toward the piano with his whiskey glass. "You know how much this piano cost me? $300,000. It's a Steinway Concert Grand, the same model they use at Carnegie Hall." He paused, letting the number sink in. Some of the guests chuckled softly. They knew what Raymond was doing. They had seen him do it before, find someone beneath him, and make a show of it. Most of them didn't have the courage to stop him. Some of them even enjoyed watching. 300,000, Raymond continued, shaking his head with a smirk. That's probably 10 years of your salary, isn't it? And here you are, touching it like it's yours. The young man swallowed hard. I meant no disrespect, sir. The piano is beautiful. I've never seen one this fine in person. Of course you haven't. Raymond stepped closer, his voice dripping with condescension. People like you don't get to own things like this. You just get to fix them for people like me. Vivian appeared at her father's side, her expression tight with embarrassment. Dad, please. He was just doing his job. Let him go. But Raymond waved her off. The whiskey had made him bold, and the attention of his guests had made him cruel. He was enjoying this too much to stop now. Wait, Raymond said, holding up his hand dramatically. I just had a wonderful idea. He turned to face the crowd that had now grown larger. Guests were drifting over from all corners of the penthouse. Sensing that something was happening. Ladies and gentlemen, Raymond announced, his voice booming across the room, we have a real treat tonight. This young man here is a piano tuner. He spends his days working on instruments he could never afford. But I'm feeling generous. He turned back to the young man, a mocking smile spreading across his face. Tell you what, if you can sit down at that piano and play something that actually moves me, I'll give you $10 million. Cash. Tonight. Right here in front of everyone. The room erupted in laughter. Guests exchanged amused glances. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record what they assumed would be a humiliating disaster. $10 million. The number hung in the air like a joke, because that's exactly what it was to Raymond. A joke. He had no intention of paying anything. He just wanted to watch this poor piano tuner embarrass himself in front of 200 wealthy strangers. The young man stood frozen. His face had gone from red to pale. His hands, still holding his tool bag, were trembling slightly. What's the matter? Raymond pressed, his grin widening. Don't know how to play? I thought piano tuners at least knew the basics. Or do you just tighten strings all day, like some kind of mechanic? More laughter from the crowd. Vivian grabbed her father's arm. Dad, stop. This isn't funny. It's hilarious, Raymond shot back. Look at him. He's terrified. The young man looked around the room. Everywhere he turned, he saw smirking faces, raised phones, and eyes filled with amusement at his expense. These people didn't see him as a human being. To them, he was just entertainment. A nobody who had wandered into a world where he didn't belong. He should leave. Every instinct told him to pick up his bag, walk out the door, and never look back. He had dealt with rich people before. He knew how this worked. Nothing good would come from engaging with a man like Raymond Whitfield. But then something shifted in his eyes. It was subtle. So subtle that almost no one noticed. His jaw tightened. His breathing slowed. And for just a moment, the fear in his expression was replaced by something else entirely. He set his tool bag down on the floor. The laughter in the room began to fade as guests realized he wasn't leaving. Instead, he was walking toward the piano. Raymond's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Well, looks like we have a brave one. The young man said nothing. He simply pulled out the bench, sat down, and placed his fingers gently on the keys. The room fell silent. 200 pairs of eyes watched as this unknown piano tuner in his worn-out suit prepared to play. A $300,000 instrument. Raymond leaned back, arms crossed, a smug smile still on his face. He couldn't wait to see this fool embarrass himself. But what happened next would change everything. The piano tuner sat completely still for a moment. His fingers rested on the keys, but he didn't press them. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was slow and deep. The guests watched with amused curiosity. A few of them whispered to each other, placing bets on how badly this would go. One man in an expensive gray suit nudged his wife and said, loud enough for others to hear, $20 says he doesn't even know where Middle C is. Raymond stood with his arms crossed, that smug smile still plastered on his face. He was already planning his next joke, the clever remark he would make when this poor fool stumbled through some clumsy melody. This was going to be the highlight of his evening. But the young man at the piano wasn't thinking about Raymond or the crowd or the phones recording him. He was somewhere else entirely. He was back in a tiny apartment on the south side of Chicago, sitting next to his mother on a creaky wooden bench in front of an old upright piano that was missing 2 keys. Her name was Helen. Helen Porter. She had been a concert pianist once, a long time ago. Back when she was young and full of dreams, she had played on stages across the country. Critics called her a rising star. They said she had the kind of talent that comes along once in a generation. The world was supposed to be hers, but the world had other plans. Something happened when she was 28 years old, something that destroyed her career overnight. She never talked about what it was. Whenever her son asked, she would just shake her head and change the subject. All he knew was that one day she was performing at the finest concert halls in America, and the next day, every door in the music industry was slammed shut in her face. No one would hire her. No one would even return her calls. It was like she had been erased from existence. So Helen did what she had to do. She moved to Chicago, got a job as a waitress, and raised her son alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. The only thing she kept from her old life was the piano. It wasn't worth much, just an old beaten-up instrument she had bought at a garage sale. But to her, it was everything. Every night, after her shift ended and her son was supposed to be asleep, Helen would sit at that piano and play. She played Chopin, Beethoven, Debussy. She played with her eyes closed, letting the music carry her back to a time when she still believed in happy endings. Her son would sneak out of bed and sit in the hallway, listening. He never told her he was there. He just sat in the dark, letting his mother's music wash over him like a warm blanket. When he was 6 years old, she started teaching him. She couldn't afford lessons from a professional teacher, so she taught him herself. Every spare moment they had together was spent at that piano. She showed him how to read music, how to position his hands, how to feel the emotion behind every note. Music isn't about being perfect, she told him once. It's about being honest. When you play, you have to give the audience a piece of your soul. That's the only way to truly move someone. He never forgot those words. As the years went by, he got better and better. By the time he was 16, he was playing pieces that most adults couldn't master. His mother cried the first time she heard him play Chopin's Ballade No. 1. She said it reminded her of herself, back when she still had hope, but they never had money for him to pursue music seriously. There were no fancy conservatories, no competitions, no opportunities. He had to work to help pay the bills, so he got a job as a piano tuner. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept him close to the instrument he loved. 3 years ago, his mother got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. Then came the fatigue, the weight loss, the nights when she couldn't sleep because the pain was too much. By the time they finally got her to a doctor, the cancer had already spread too far. She needed treatment, but treatment cost money. Money they didn't have. He worked double shifts, took on extra clients, sold everything they owned that was worth anything. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. In the end, all he could do was sit by her bedside and hold her hand. On her last night, she asked him to play for her one more time. He pulled a chair up to her hospital bed and played an imaginary piano in the air, humming the melody of Chopin's Ballade while tears streamed down his face. She smiled, closed her eyes, and slipped away before the song was finished. That was 3 years ago. Now, sitting at this $300,000 Steinway in a Manhattan penthouse, surrounded by people who saw him as nothing more than a joke, the young man opened his eyes. He thought about his mother. He thought about everything she had lost, everything she had sacrificed, and everything she had given him. He thought about the way she used to say that music could change hearts, even the coldest ones. And then he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor floated through the air like a whisper, soft, gentle, almost fragile. The guests who had been snickering fell quiet. A man who had made the bet about middle C lowered his phone. Even Raymond's smug expression flickered for just a moment. The young man's fingers moved across the keys with a precision and grace that seemed impossible for someone in a worn-out suit. Each note was perfect, but it wasn't just technical perfection. There was something else there, something deeper. There was pain. As the piece built in intensity, the music seemed to fill every corner of the penthouse. It wrapped around the guests like a living thing, pulling at emotions they had buried long ago. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean, carrying with it all the grief and longing and love that the young man had kept locked inside him for years. He wasn't just playing a song. He was telling a story. The story of a mother who had lost everything, but never stopped believing in beauty. The story of a son who had watched her die and couldn't save her. The story of a love so deep that even death couldn't erase it. A woman in a red dress felt tears forming in her eyes and didn't know why. A businessman who hadn't cried in 20 years felt a lump growing in his throat. Vivian, Raymond's daughter, covered her mouth with her hand as silent tears rolled down her cheeks. And Raymond himself stood frozen. The smug smile was gone. The cruel glint in his eyes had disappeared. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Raymond Whitfield was feeling something real. The music had cut through all his walls, all his defenses, all the armor he had built around his heart. Memories he had buried long ago came flooding back. His mother working double shifts to feed him. The small apartment where he grew up, not so different from the one this young man probably lived in. The person he used to be, before money and power turned him into someone he wouldn't recognize. His hands began to shake. The piece reached its climax, the notes thundering through the room with an intensity that seemed almost impossible for one person to create. And then, slowly, it began to fade. The storm gave way to calm. The thunder softened to rain. And finally, with one last gentle chord, the music stopped. Silence. Complete. And total silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. The entire room was frozen, suspended in a moment that felt almost sacred. The young man sat at the piano with his head bowed, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Playing that piece had taken everything out of him. It always did. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was slow at first, just one pair of hands. But then another person joined, and another, and another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory applause, but the kind that comes from the heart. The kind that people give when they have just witnessed something extraordinary. Vivian rushed forward, wiping her tears. That was, I don't even have words. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Others crowded around, asking who he was, where he had trained, why he was working as a piano tuner when he played like that. But the young man didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the keys, lost in memories of his mother. Raymond hadn't moved from his spot. He stood apart from the crowd, his face pale, his expression unreadable. The whiskey glass in his hand was trembling. Then an elderly woman pushed through the crowd. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and pearls around her neck. Her name was Catherine Wells, and she had been a patron of the arts for over 50 years. She had funded symphonies, sponsored young musicians, and attended more concerts than she could count. She walked straight up to the piano and stared at the young man with wide eyes. "That interpretation," she whispered. "I know that interpretation. I've only ever heard one other person play the ballade that way." The young man looked up at her. "What was your mother's name?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling. The room fell silent again. Everyone sensed that something important was happening, though they didn't understand what. The young man swallowed hard. "Her name was Helen Porter." Catherine gasped and stepped back as if she had been struck. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're Helen's son." Raymond's face went white as a ghost. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor, but no one was looking at the broken glass. Everyone was looking at Raymond, whose expression had transformed from shock into something that looked almost like terror. And in that moment, the young man realized that this night was about to become something much bigger than a simple bet. His mother's name had just changed everything. Catherine Wells stood trembling in front of the piano, her aged hands clasped tightly together. The color had drained from her face, and her eyes were fixed on the young man with an intensity that made the entire room uncomfortable. "Helen Porter," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I would never hear that name again." The young man rose slowly from the piano bench. "You knew my mother? Knew her?" Catherine let out a sad laugh. "My dear boy, I discovered her. I was the one who first heard her play at a small competition in Boston when she was just 19 years old. I knew immediately that she was special. I became her patron, her supporter. I helped launch her career." The guests exchanged confused glances. Most of them had never heard of Helen Porter, but a few of the older ones, the ones who had been part of the classical music world decades ago, began to murmur among themselves. "I remember Helen Porter," said a gray-haired man near the bar. "She was extraordinary. Everyone said she would be the next great American pianist. And then she just vanished." "She didn't vanish," Catherine said sharply. "She was destroyed." The word hung in the air like smoke. Destroyed. It was such a heavy word, filled with implications that no one quite understood yet. The young man stepped closer to Catherine. "What do you mean? What happened to her?" Catherine opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, a voice cut through the room. "That's enough." Everyone turned. Raymond Whitfield was still standing where he had been, but something about him had changed. His face was no longer pale with shock. Now it was hard, controlled, like a mask had slipped back into place. But his eyes betrayed him. There was fear in those eyes, the kind of fear that comes when a secret you've buried for decades suddenly claws its way back to the surface. "This is my daughter's engagement party," Raymond said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's not ruin it with ancient history." The young man played beautifully. "I'll honor my bet. $10 million. Now can we please move on?" He snapped his fingers, and one of his assistants rushed forward with a checkbook. But Catherine wasn't finished. She had waited too long, carried this weight for too many years. She turned to face Raymond directly, and there was fire in her eyes. "You don't get to buy your way out of this, Raymond. Not this time." Raymond's jaw tightened. "Catherine, I'm warning you." "Warning me?" She laughed bitterly. "What are you going to do? Destroy my career too? I'm 74 years old. I have nothing left to lose." The room had gone completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Everyone sensed that something significant was unfolding, something that had been hidden for a very long time. Vivian stepped forward, her face pale with confusion. "Dad, what is she talking about? What did you do?" Raymond didn't answer. He couldn't even look at his daughter. Catherine turned back to the young man. Her expression softened when she looked at him, filled with a sadness that seemed to go bone deep. "Your mother was the most talented pianist I ever encountered," she said gently. "By the time she was 25, she was performing at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, all the great stages. Critics adored her. Audiences loved her. She had everything." She paused, gathering herself. And then she met him. She pointed directly at Raymond Dott. The young man felt his heart stop. He looked at Raymond, then back at Catherine, trying to understand. "They met at a fundraiser," Catherine continued. Raymond was young then, just starting to make his fortune in real estate. He saw Helen perform and became obsessed with her. He pursued her relentlessly, sent her flowers, gifts, letters. He showed up at her concerts, her rehearsals, everywhere she went. Raymond's hands curled into fists at his sides. "That's not how it happened." "That's exactly how it happened," Catherine shot back. "I was there. I saw everything." Helen tried to be polite at first. She thanked him for his interest, but made it clear she wasn't looking for a relationship. She was focused on her music, on her career. But Raymond Whitfield wasn't used to hearing the word no. The young man felt something cold spreading through his chest. He had always wondered what had happened to his mother, what terrible event had stolen her future. And now, standing in this penthouse surrounded by strangers, he was finally about to learn the truth. He asked her to dinner one night after a performance, Catherine said. She declined. He asked again the next week. She declined again. This went on for months. And then, when he finally realized she would never say yes, he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one would. Vivian grabbed her father's arm. "Dad, tell me this isn't true." Raymond said nothing. His silence was louder than any confession. Catherine's voice grew harder. Raymond used his money and his connections to blacklist Helen from the entire music industry. He called in favors, made threats, spread lies. He told concert halls that she was difficult to work with, that she had substance problems, that she was unstable. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. When a man with that much money and power decides to destroy someone, the truth doesn't stand a chance. The young man's legs felt weak. He reached out and steadied himself against the piano. Within 6 months, Catherine continued, every door in the music world was closed to her. No one would book her. No one would return her calls. Her agent dropped her. Her friends distanced themselves because they were afraid of being blacklisted too. I tried to help her, but even my influence wasn't enough to fight against Raymond's campaign. Tears were streaming down Catherine's face now, but she didn't stop. The last time I saw Helen was at a coffee shop in New York. She was pale, thin, broken. She told me she was leaving the city, moving somewhere far away where no one knew her name. She said she couldn't stay here anymore, couldn't walk past the concert halls where she used to perform, and know she would never set foot on those stages again. I begged her to stay, to keep fighting. But she just shook her head and said some battles can't be won. Catherine looked at the young man with tears in her eyes. That was 25 years ago. I never saw her again. I always wondered what happened to her, whether she found peace, whether she was okay. She paused. And now I know she had a son. A son who plays exactly like she did. The room was frozen. No one knew what to say or do. The only sound was the soft crying of several guests who had been moved by the story. The young man stood motionless, processing everything he had just heard. All those years, all those questions, all those nights when his mother would sit at the piano with tears rolling down her cheeks. Now he understood. Now he knew who had stolen her dreams. He turned slowly to face Raymond. The millionaire looked smaller somehow, like the truth had physically diminished him. His expensive suit, his perfect hair, his gleaming watch, none of it mattered anymore. In this moment, he was just a man confronted by the wreckage of his own cruelty. "Is it true?" the young man asked quietly. Raymond's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Is it true?" the young man repeated, his voice harder this time. Raymond closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I was young. I was stupid. I thought if she just gave me a chance, she would see." "See what?" The young man cut him off. "That you were the kind of man who destroys people when they don't give you what you want?" Raymond flinched as if he had been struck. Vivian stepped away from her father, her face twisted with disgust. "How could you? How could you do something like that?" "Vivian, please, you have to understand." "Understand what?" She shouted. "That my father is a monster? That everything I thought I knew about you was a lie?" She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Raymond reached out toward her, but didn't follow. He knew he had no right to ask for her understanding, that the young man watched all of this with a strange calmness. The initial shock had passed, replaced by something colder, something harder. But it wasn't anger, not exactly. It was clarity. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. The paper was yellowed with age, the edges soft from being handled too many times. "My mother gave this to me the night before she died," he said quietly. "She made me promise not to open it until I found the person who ruined her life. She said I would know when the time was right." He held up the envelope for everyone to see. "I've carried this letter for 3 years. I didn't come here by accident, Mr. Whitfield. I've been searching for you. I took this job because I knew your piano needed tuning, and I knew you would be here tonight." Raymond's face went even paler. "What? What does it say?" The young man looked down at the envelope, then back at Raymond. "I don't know. I've never opened it. But I think it's time we all found out." He slid his finger under the seal and began to open the letter. Every person in the room held their breath, waiting to see what secrets Helen Porter had left behind. The young man's hands trembled as he held the envelope. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble to dust at any moment. For 3 years, he had carried this letter everywhere he went. It had traveled with him through countless sleepless nights, through the darkest moments of grief, through every step of his search for the truth. And now, finally, he was about to read it. The room was completely silent. 200 people stood frozen, barely breathing, waiting to hear the words of a woman who had been destroyed by the man standing among them. Some expected accusations. Others expected rage. A few expected a detailed account of every terrible thing Raymond Whitfield had done. The young man unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was shaky, written by hands that had grown weak from illness. But he recognized it immediately. It was his mother's writing. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "My dearest son." His voice cracked on the first words. He paused, steadied himself, and continued. "If you are reading this, then you have found him. You have found the man who took everything from me. I know you must have so many questions, and I am sorry I never had the courage to answer them while I was alive. Some wounds are too deep to speak about. Some memories are too painful to revisit. But you deserve the truth, even if I could not give it to you myself." The young man glanced up at Raymond. The millionaire stood rigid, his face drained of all color, his eyes fixed on the letter like it was a weapon pointed at his heart. The young man continued reading. "When I was young, I believed that music could save me. I believed that if I played beautifully enough, if I worked hard enough, the world would reward me with the life I dreamed of. And for a while, it did. I stood on stages, I had only imagined as a child. I heard applause that made my heart soar. I thought I had finally made it, but I learned a hard lesson. The world does not always reward goodness. Sometimes the cruelest people win. Sometimes saying no to the wrong person can cost you everything. Catherine Wells wiped tears from her eyes. Several other guests did the same. Raymond Whitfield asked me to love him, and I could not. My heart belonged to music, not to him. I thought he would accept my answer and move on. I was wrong. He could not accept being told no. So he decided to take away the only thing I had ever loved. The young man's voice grew stronger as he read. He used his money to silence me. He used his power to erase me. One by one, every door closed. Every friend disappeared. Every dream died. I went from performing at Carnegie Hall to waiting tables at a diner, wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely. Raymond's legs seemed to give out. He stumbled backward and caught himself on a nearby table. His assistant moved to help him, but he waved the man away. For many years, I hated him. I hated him with every fiber of my being. I lay awake at night, imagining all the ways I could hurt him back, all the ways I could make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused me. That hatred kept me alive for a long time. It gave me a reason to keep going. The young man paused. Here it came, he thought. The accusations, the condemnation, the words that would finally destroy. Raymond Whitfield the way he had destroyed his mother. But what came next was something no one expected. And then I had you. The young man's breath caught in his throat. The moment I held you in my arms, everything changed. I looked at your tiny face, your perfect little fingers, and I realized that hatred was not something I wanted to carry anymore. I did not want to raise you in a home filled with bitterness and rage. I did not want my pain to become your inheritance. Tears began rolling down the young man's cheeks, but he kept reading. So I made a choice. I chose to let go, not for Raymond's sake, but for mine, and for yours. I chose to focus on the beautiful things that remained in my life instead of the beautiful things that had been taken from me. I chose to teach you music, to share with you the only gift I had left to give. I chose love over hatred. The young man had to stop for a moment. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Catherine stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on his arm, giving him strength to continue. He wiped his eyes and read on. My dear son, I know you must be angry. I know you must want justice, revenge, something to make all of this right. But I am asking you, from wherever I am now, please do not let hatred consume you the way it almost consumed me. Raymond Whitfield took my career, but I did not let him take my soul. Do not let him take yours. Raymond made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. His hand flew to his mouth, and his whole body began to shake. I forgive him. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. People gasped. Someone let out a cry of disbelief. Raymond's knees buckled completely, and he sank to the floor, tears streaming down his face. The young man kept reading, his voice barely above a whisper now. I forgive Raymond Whitfield, not because he deserves it, not because what he did was acceptable. I forgive him because holding on to that anger was killing me slowly, and I refused to give him that power. I forgive him because I want to leave this world with a peaceful heart, not a bitter one. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and it does not mean that he should escape the consequences of his actions. That is why I'm writing this letter. That is why I wanted you to find him. The young man looked up from the letter and met Raymond's eyes. The millionaire was on his knees, his expensive suit crumpled, his face wet with tears. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world collapse. I want him to know that I survived. I want him to know that despite everything he did, I found happiness. I found it in a tiny apartment with a broken piano. I found it in the sound of my son's laughter. I found it in the music we made together, just the two of us, in a home filled with love instead of luxury. I want him to know that he failed. He tried to destroy me, but I am still here, in every note my son plays, in every melody that lives on through him. My music did not die. It just found a new voice. The young man's hands were shaking so badly, he could barely hold the paper. And finally, I want him to know that it is not too late. It is not too late for him to become a different person. It is not too late for him to use his wealth and power to help people instead of hurting them. I do not know if he will choose that path, but I want to give him the chance, because that is what forgiveness means. It means leaving the door open, even for those who have hurt us the most. The young man read the final lines. To my beautiful son, I love you more than words can express. You were the greatest gift of my life, the one thing that made all the pain worth it. Please do not waste your precious years on revenge. Live fully, love deeply, play beautifully, and know that wherever I am listening. And I am so proud of you. With all my love, forever and always. Your mother. The young man folded the letter carefully and pressed it against his chest. The room remained silent. No one knew what to say. They had expected rage and condemnation. They had expected a letter designed to destroy Raymond Whitfield once and for all. Instead, they had witnessed something far more powerful. They had witnessed Grace. Raymond was still on his knees, his body racked with sobs. He had spent his entire life building walls around his heart. He had convinced himself that what he did to Helen Porter was justified, that she had deserved it for rejecting him, that he was the victim. He had buried the truth so deep that he almost believed his own lies. But now, hearing her words, hearing her forgiveness, all those walls came crashing down. The truth he had hidden from for 25 years was finally staring him in the face. He had destroyed an innocent woman's life because she wouldn't love him. And instead of hating him, she had forgiven him. That forgiveness broke him more completely than any accusation ever could. Vivian slowly walked back through the crowd. She stood over her father, looking down at him with an expression that was hard to read. There was still anger there, still disgust. But there was something else, too. Something that might have been pity. "Dad," she said quietly. Raymond looked up at her, his face a mask of shame and grief. "What are you going to do now?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything. What kind of man was Raymond Whitfield going to be? Would he go back to his old ways once this moment passed? Would he bury this night like he had buried everything else? Or would he finally change? Raymond looked at his daughter, then at the young man still holding his mother's letter, then at the crowd of people who had witnessed his deepest shame. And for the first time in his life, Raymond Whitfield had no idea what to say. Raymond Whitfield remained on his knees for what felt like an eternity. The marble floor was cold and hard beneath him, but he didn't feel it. He didn't feel anything except the crushing weight of 25 years of guilt finally catching up with him. The guests stood watching, unsure what to do. Some whispered among themselves. Others simply stared. This was not how they expected the evening to end. They had come for champagne and celebration. Instead, they had witnessed the unraveling of one of the most powerful men in New York. Vivian still stood over her father, waiting for an answer to her question. What was he going to do now? Raymond slowly raised his head. His eyes were red and swollen. His face, usually so composed and confident, was broken. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a nightmare, only to realize the nightmare was his own life. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know what to do." It was the most honest thing he had said in decades. The young man watched from beside the piano. He still held his mother's letter against his chest, protecting it like something precious. Part of him had wanted Raymond to suffer. Part of him had wanted to see this powerful man completely destroyed, humiliated in front of everyone the way his mother had been humiliated all those years ago. But watching Raymond now, broken and sobbing on the floor, he didn't feel satisfaction. He felt something else entirely, something his mother had written about in her letter. He felt the first stirrings of compassion. His mother had spent years teaching him to play piano, but she had also spent years teaching him something far more important. She had taught him that kindness was not weakness. She had taught him that forgiveness was not surrender. She had taught him that the measure of a person was not how they treated those above them, but how they treated those below them not. And right now, Raymond Whitfield was about as low as a person could get. The young man took a deep breath and walked over to where Raymond knelt. The crowd parted to let him through, watching in silence. He stopped directly in front of the broken millionaire and looked down at him. "Stand up," he said quietly. Raymond looked up, confusion in his eyes. He had expected anger. He had expected accusations. He had expected the young man to finish destroying him. "Stand up," the young man repeated, and this time he extended his hand. Raymond stared at the offered hand for a long moment. This was the son of the woman he had destroyed. This was the man who had every right to hate him, to ruin him, to take everything from him, the way he had taken everything from Helen Porter. And yet here he was, offering to help him to his feet, with trembling fingers. Raymond reached out and took the young man's hand. He pulled himself up slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. They stood face to face. Two men from completely different worlds, connected by a tragedy that had shaped both their lives. "My mother believed people could change," the young man said. "She believed that no one was beyond redemption. I don't know if she was right, but I'm willing to find out." He pressed the letter into Raymond's hands. "Keep this. Read it again when you need to remember what kind of person she was. And then ask yourself if you want to spend the rest of your life being the man who destroyed her, or if you want to become someone she might have been proud of." Raymond clutched the letter like a lifeline. Fresh tears rolled down his cheeks, but he didn't look away. For the first time, he held the young man's gaze without shame, without excuses, without trying to minimize what he had done. "I'm sorry," Raymond said. His voice was raw and broken. "I know those words mean nothing after everything I did, but I am so deeply, truly sorry." The young man nodded slowly. "I believe you, but don't apologize to me. I'm not the one you hurt." He glanced over at Catherine Wells, who was watching the exchange with tears streaming down her face. "There are others who suffered because of what you did. People who were afraid to help my mother because they feared what you might do to them. People who have carried guilt for decades because they couldn't protect her. Start with them." Raymond turned to look at Catherine, the elderly woman who had discovered Helen Porter all those years ago, who had tried and failed to save her career, who had spent 25 years wondering what more she could have done. Raymond walked toward her slowly, each step heavy with shame. "Catherine," he said, his voice cracking, "I am so sorry. I know I made your life difficult too. I know you tried to help her, and I made sure you couldn't. I know I threatened anyone who stood by her side. That was unforgivable." Catherine studied him for a long moment. Then she did something no one expected. She reached out and took his hands in hers. "Helen forgave you," she said softly. "I suppose I can try to do the same. But forgiveness must be earned, Raymond. It must be followed by action." Raymond nodded vigorously. I know it must." He turned to face the crowd. 200 people stared back at him, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to cautious curiosity. I have spent my entire life building a fortune, Raymond said, his voice growing stronger. I told myself I did it through hard work and intelligence. But the truth is, I also did it through cruelty. I stepped on people. I destroyed anyone who got in my way. Helen Porter was not the only one. She was just the one I hurt the most. He paused, gathering himself. That ends tonight. I don't know how to undo the damage I've caused, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. Starting with creating a foundation in Helen Porter's name. A murmur rippled through the crowd. $100 million, Raymond continued. That's what I'm pledging tonight. A foundation dedicated to supporting musicians who can't afford training, who face barriers in the industry, who need medical care they can't pay for. The kind of foundation that might have saved Helen if it had existed when she needed it. He looked at the young man. And I want you to lead it. I want you to be the one who decides where the money goes, which artists receive support, how your mother's legacy lives on. Not me. I don't deserve that honor. But you do. The young man was stunned. He had come to this penthouse expecting confrontation. He had prepared himself for anger, for denial, for a powerful man using every resource at his disposal to silence the truth. He had not prepared for this. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Say yes, Vivian spoke up. She had been watching everything in silence, processing, trying to reconcile the father she thought she knew with the monster he had been. But seeing him now, seeing him finally take responsibility, she felt something shift inside her. Say yes, she repeated. Let something good come from all this pain. The young man looked at his mother's letter, still clutched in Raymond's hands. He thought about all the years she had struggled, all the dreams she had lost, all the music that had lived only within the walls of their tiny apartment, and he thought about what she would want him to do. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. For her, the room erupted in applause. Not the mocking applause from earlier, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. People were crying, embracing each other, moved by what they had witnessed. Catherine Wells pulled the young man into a tight hug. Your mother would be so proud, she whispered. So incredibly proud. 1 year later, the Helen Porter Foundation held its grand opening ceremony in a converted concert hall in downtown Manhattan. Over 300 people attended, including musicians, patrons, critics, and supporters from across the country. Raymond Whitfield sat in the front row, but he did not give a speech. He had publicly confessed everything he had done, not just to Helen, but to others he had hurt over the years. His reputation was destroyed. His business relationships crumbled. Many of his old friends refused to speak to him. But for the first time in his life, Raymond was at peace. Vivian sat beside him, slowly rebuilding her relationship with her father. It would take time. Some wounds do not heal quickly. But she had seen genuine change in him, and she was willing to give him the chance her mother had written about in her letter. When the ceremony began, the young man walked onto the stage. He wore a simple black suit, nothing fancy, nothing expensive. He didn't need to impress anyone. He sat down at the grand piano that had been placed center stage, a beautiful Steinway donated by Catherine Wells. Before I play, he said into the microphone, I want to say something about my mother. The room fell silent. Helen Porter never got the recognition she deserved. The world forgot her name. But I never did. And now, through this foundation, neither will anyone else. He placed his fingers on the keys. This is for you, Mom, wherever you are. I hope you can hear it. And then he began to play. The notes of Chopin's Ballade, No. 1 filled the hall. The same piece he had played that night at the penthouse. The same piece his mother had played for him before she died. Raymond closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. Tears streamed down his face, but they were different tears now. They were tears of gratitude, of redemption, of a man finally becoming who he should have been all along. And somewhere, in a place beyond the reach of pain or sorrow, Helen Porter smiled. Her music had found its way home.